This is a simple HTTP library written in Go. The function doRequest creates a request for a hard-coded URL. Then client do executes that request and our function returns the response and error. When unit testing this library, we are simply calling our function and checking that response and errors have the expected values. However, this is not an ideal approach. Actually executing a real HTTP request in a test is quite slow. If you accumulate a lot of these tests, your test suite will run slower and slower. Also, this introduces a hard dependency of your test on the health of the called web server. If it goes down, so will your tests, even though your logic did not change. And asserting that our logic is sound is the goal here. So how can we fix those problems? What we want to do is to mock the HTTP call. Mocking in a test setting refers to returning a predefined result for dependencies and not relying on their actual behavior. In Go, mocking network calls is done with the HTTP test package. The trick is to first create a server into which we pass a handler. Then we can call a method on the server object that returns a client object. This client is configured to only call our test server, and since we can control what the handler is doing, we have full control over what the client receives in our test. So let's return to our test and start by initializing a test server. Now we are passing a handler into that server. For now, it just writes hello world to the response body and sets the status code to 200 OK. Next up, we call the client method on the server object. This gives us a client that is configured to call the test server. Lastly, we need to make sure to use this new client in our library. Here we are currently creating a brand new client each time the method is called. Let's refactor this function to be a method on the struct that has the client as a property. Now just add the receiver for the doRequest function and make sure to use the client property of that receiver. Going back to the test, let's fix it by using the code we just wrote, by creating a new struct and calling doRequest on it. Finally, running the test confirms that our approach worked. Our test now runs faster and more robust by not actually making a network request. Let's have another look at our test server. It currently returns the string hello world for any request it receives. But this is not what our code would see in the production environment. If we go back, we see that we call HTTP bin, which returns a JSON response. You could go to this line and manually edit the response, but there's a nicer way to do it. And there's a library called GoVCR, which can record the response of a real HTTP request and replay it later in our test. That way you can get deterministic but realistic responses every time in your test. Check it out, the link is in the description.